Welcome to another episode of Wide Net of Esoterica. I'm your host, Ian Stewart. Today, we've got a question from Dan in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Dan writes, I've always wondered about how the wood dries in timber framing. If the mortises and tenons are both shaped when the wood is green, won't they shrink as the wood dries? Do the mortises and tenons shrink at the same rate, or is there a potential for the tenon to dry faster than the mortise, thereby loosening up? Dan, that's a great question. So it's true, timber framing is done with green wood. And there are a couple of ways we compensate for that. And there are reasons why we do it that way. Green wood is easier to shape. There's a lot more water still in the fibers, so it's easier to cut. Anyone who's ever shaped white oak that's been freshly cut versus white oak that's been sitting around for, say, a year will tell you it's the differences are night and day. Even pine that's been sitting around for a year or two, drying, it becomes harder and harder to shape. Also, as they dry, all wood shrinks, splits, cracks, twists. All these things that, imperfections in the tree play out as the timber dries. But if it's locked into a frame, it can resist some of that. So, to your question, shrinkage. Well, there are three types of shrinkage usually found in timber. Longitudinal, so that's shrinkage along the length. You've got radial shrinkage, which is shrinkage out in a radius from the pith or center of the tree, and tangential shrinkage, which if you look at like a 2x4 or 2x6 and you see sort of a cross section, you see that it's been cut tangential to the pith, so it's perpendicular to the pith. Tangential has the greatest ratio of shrinkage. Typically tangential will shrink about 8% along that width. Radial cut stuff shrinks about half as much, so it shrinks about 4%. Longitudinal shrinkage is 0.1%. So you don't have to worry about a timber losing length over time. All you have to worry about is radial shrinkage or tangential shrinkage. And we typically don't worry about tangential shrinkage in timber framing because we're generally dealing with boxed heart timbers. Or timbers that are sizable enough that they're not gonna, it's when you get into plank boarding, that's when you have to worry about tangential shrinkage, 2x6s, 1x12s, that sort of thing. That's where you get cupping, shrinking, twisting. But that's not to say there isn't shrinkage in timber framing. We know there is. The tenon will shrink, the mortise will shrink, but they'll shrink at slightly different rates. So how do you deal with that? Well, timber framers use what's called draw boring. So, picture, if you will, this post back here. And up here, we've got two peg holes. Those are marked out before the joint is put together. Those are marked out and drilled. Now, on the tenon, we know where those pinholes are in the mortise. And we offset the pinholes on the tenon by somewhere between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch closer to the shoulder. So, the holes in the tenon here are 1/8 of an inch closer to this line than the holes in the mortise. So when you put that joint together with your green wood, using a hardwood peg, and that's sort of the trick, is an oak peg, locust peg, a hard, solid grained wood for your peg. When you drive that peg, it's going to pull that joint tightly together. And that is, and it's going to put the tenon under tension. So as the wood dries, as the shrinkage happens at the shoulder, that tenon's going to continue to snug up. So draw boring. Draw boring is the way we compensate in timber framing for shrinkage. It's pretty straightforward, and once you understand the concept, even if you're doing it in smaller carpentry, you're working with a little greener, just offsetting your peg holes will tighten up that joint, and it will combat any shrinkage over time. So there it is. How do we compensate for shrinkage in timber framing? And it's also, getting the frame up green, getting it all locked together, means that any twists, any checks, splits, they're all going to be captured. You look at any old timber frame, there will be splits. Or as a friend of mine, Rudy Christian from Ohio, has told me, when you're dealing with wood drying, pine is all right, left is okie dokie too. So, what does that mean? Besides for being sort of catchy. Softwoods, diffuse porous wood, when it has a right hand twist, will not unwind. Compact porous, hardwood, oak, if it has a left hand twist, will not unwind. And what do I mean by unwind? Well, if you look at a tree and it's got a twist in it, if you look at a timber and it's got a twist in it, and the timber's sort of done one of these, and you can tell that it's, the floorboards are pushed up, or the timber's twisting itself out of its mortise or its lap, that's unwinding. The grain of the tree as it dries, splitting out, and the sort of timber wants to, get back into, it wants to release. It's no longer being held in place by limbs and bark, so it'll unwind on you. So, you're looking at a tree, it's a pine tree, it's got a right hand twist, you can use that. It's got a left hand twist, not so much. And that's just one of those old bits of knowledge that sticks around. So pine is all right, left is okie dokie too. I don't know where that saying came from, but Rudy taught it to me years ago, and it's every barn I've looked at, every structure I've looked at, it holds true. So shrinkage, twisting. Part of it is also picking out the right timbers. We know it's going to shrink, so we deal with it. We deal with the shrinkage in the joinery. But also a good framer, especially if you've got the ability to go out and pick your own timbers. I've sent plenty of timbers back to the sawmill, and also when I'm taking trees in the forest, you tend to learn to know what you're looking for, and you can pick what you need right there. And because of the way we're hewing our timbers or sawing them, we don't have to worry about tangential drying, really. It's mostly radial and longitudinal. So Dan, hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, write me and I'll get back to you. So we've got some more questions we'll deal with tomorrow, but for now, this is Wide Net of Esoterica. I'm your host, Ian Stewart, and if you've got questions, down below here in the description on YouTube is a link to the form to fill out, so go ahead and fill that out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.